for folks who don't know, the Free State Project is a movement of voluntary human action where we are trying to concentrate libertarians in the state of New Hampshire.
I think we've done more in the last decade than every other libertarian movement combined has accomplished in the last 5 decades.
Are my friends and my neighbors who are willing to stand against tyranny, make their voices heard, and have a goddamn impact.
We have a problem where too many people are afraid to say what they believe in, let alone actually do something about it. If you're afraid to stand outside the TSA line and piss off 97% of people who are waiting to just take the arm builder up their ass for 5 seconds, then you're probably not ever going to make the change.
Free State Project, again, it's 1% of the Free State movement.
I am a friend of the Free State Project.
And would you encourage people to check it out?
Absolutely. Check it out. Find out. If you like it, join and continue the effort.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, libertarians, anarchists, movers, natives, and those on your way, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Free State Live, where you get to hear about all the ways you can live free and thrive in the free state of New Hampshire. First and foremost, time to welcome back our host. I'm Justin O'Donnell, former Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate and host of the Subversive podcast. And joining me, as always, we have author, activist, Free State Project board member, and host of the Carla Garrick Show, Queen Quill herself, Carla Garrick. How are you?
I am always well, or I try really hard to be.
It's always fun when your name and description goes back from being some kind of troll against Twitter to just admitting your royalty in the state. But
you know, once in a while, you got to remind people your monarchy.
Absolutely. And our favorite keyboard activist, local family man, Kevin from the internet, Kevin Haley. How are you, Kevin?
I am definitely a keyboard activist. It's a good description.
Well, great to have you back, more regular as always. And our special guest tonight, joining us, the actively unwoke public school watchdog and YouTube personality, Karlyn Borysenko, technically a doctor.
Technically a doctor and also candidate for governor in New Hampshire. I am actually technically, I think, running for an office of some sort.
Well, it's something that's definitely fun to do. And as always, before we dive into political, divisive, or hot topic subjects, just a reminder that the Free State Project is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit that does not specifically endorse or support any legislation. Any information presented in this episode is for educational and informational purposes only and does not reflect the views of the organization, maybe just your hosts.
Yes. And if it's me, it's not even educational. So.
All right. Hey, well, thank you so much for tuning in, Karlyn. It's been a hot topic, hot year for your favorite subject, or something that you've kind of gotten a name for yourself being involved in and active in here in New Hampshire. And as always, like, it's hard not to get involved politically when you're in New Hampshire. And it seems like there's a political issue, argument, or debate every other day in New Hampshire, but it seems like nothing has been as hot and as fiery as the past year's fight over critical race theory in public school. And I feel like a lot of people, not just in New Hampshire, but across the country, don't even know what critical race theory is, but they've formed an opinion on it one way or another. You're kind of our closest thing to an expert here. So.
Well, I do have a definition of critical race theory. Critical race theory is an ideology that started in academia in the 1970s that says racism exists everywhere, in every person, in everything, in every interaction, and that the job of the critical race theorist is to explore how, not if, how racism manifests itself in any given situation, because one of the very first things that critical race theorists do is they assume that racism has always occurred in every interaction, no matter what. James Lindsay has a little bit of a simplified definition. He says that critical race theory is the belief that racism is the fundamental organizing principle of society. So,
I mean, that's how it's broken down.
I do know how to define it. What was that, Kevin?
Oh, I said that's definitely how it's broken down at a collegiate level. I mean, it could be reduced to that for sure.
Well, even much earlier than the collegiate level now. I mean, the Arizona Department of Education has introduced guidance that children can become racist as early as 3 years old. Public schools in New York City are sending out guidance to parents telling them that they need to become white. What is it? white traitors. That's what it was. They told parents that they needed to become white traitors, otherwise they were white supremacists. Yeah, this stuff is actually being taught. Don't believe anyone who tells you that critical race theory is not being taught in K through 12 schools. It absolutely is, including in New Hampshire, to be honest. Even though we did have a anti-CRT bill passed last year, it sadly didn't cover everything that they needed to cover.
So I think before we dive into that, and before we dive into like the nuance of like the politics of that we're dealing with here, and it's not just a New Hampshire issue. This has been a national issue. It's been a national fight. It's been the forefront of congressional hearings and arguments in D.C. Like, what's your background? Like, and how did you end up such a force in kind of like libertarian and conservatarian politics on the internet in the past couple of years?
It was a complete and total accident. So I was a Democrat for 20 years, and it actually started, funnily enough, in my knitting community, where I kind of like turned my head off to politics after Barack Obama got elected. I was like, the Democrats are in control. I don't need to worry about it anymore. And so I just really stopped paying attention. And I was one of those people that cried when Donald Trump got elected because I was so shocked and so caught off guard. But I didn't go as insane as all of my Democrat friends, and I credit that with going off to Peru to do ayahuasca on a mountaintop for 10 days right after the 2016 election. So that was probably one of the best moves I've ever made, and it gave me some focus and some perspective. And so I came back and I was like, okay, Trump's president, this kind of sucks, but whatever. Well, all of my friends started to go insane in the intervening years, and not just my friends, but my knitting community also went insane. It started being taken over by social justice warriors who were running around telling people what words they could use and what they couldn't. They were trying to destroy businesses. They actually tormented one guy, a gay guy of ironies. They tormented him so badly he went into the hospital on suicide watch. And so I was watching all of this happen in my knitting community, and I was like, what is going on? Like, these are people I politically aligned myself with. Why are they losing their minds? And so I started kind of challenging myself to figure out what was going on. And that led me on a journey of listening to people that I really thought I would disagree with. And I slowly found over the course of that, the media had lied to me. I very much red-pilled on all of the information I had been given all of my life. And because I live in New Hampshire, I happened to have the opportunity to go to a Donald Trump rally a couple days before the New Hampshire primary in 2020. And I was so scared. I didn't know what I was going to find there. I was like, all these people are going to hate me. But I actually went and had a really good time, and I ended up writing about it on the internet, thinking that no one would ever read my article. And a week later, 3 million people had, and it had been tweeted by Donald Trump Jr., and it had been like tweeted by all the Fox News hosts. I was on Fox News. I was on Glenn Beck read my full article on his radio show. And so I basically got like, I was like the conservative darling for like about 15 minutes. I got vaulted into this politics space just totally unexpectedly. But I always kept my focus on what was going on with the woke stuff, because that was what was most concerning to me. I'm an organizational psychologist by trade. And so I'm one of those people that literally does corporate training when times are like normal. And so I had seen it kind of come into the corporate training space, not again, really understanding what it was. And I just kept like learning about it and doing activism around it. And eventually ended up writing this here book that's coming out tomorrow called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against woke insanity in your life, because it truly has invaded every aspect of our world. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, because it is an extremely complicated thing to understand. And it's something that we all need to wrap our heads around, because the progressive left has been doing this for decades. It's been a battle of inches for them. They've slowly infiltrated businesses and government and media and entertainment and religion. And the worst place they've infiltrated is the schools. They are starting to teach this stuff and teach children to be activists as early as pre-K. That's not an exaggeration. That's happening all over the country right now. And so that's kind of, I just got obsessed with it. And now this is what I do all day, every day, which is why I'm slowly going crazy and like pulling my hair out on a daily basis, because it is all insane.
Wow. Yeah. You know, for me, just it's been such an eye-opening experience, because having grown up in apartheid South Africa, you know, I've always sort of, I think much like German people carry some kind of, or are told they're supposed to carry some kind of guilt for Nazism. You know, I remember so distinctly being so impressed when I came to America that it wasn't this overtly racist country where everything and every relationship and every interaction had this sort of racial quality to it, mostly because it had been politicized, right?
Mhm.
And so, to literally go from feeling a sense of, relief. And honestly, like, I voted for Nelson Mandela. I was an anti-apartheid activist. There was nothing good about apartheid. That was sort of the police statey stuff, right? But to just really see this infiltration happen here in America, and the aha moment for me was we were driving to an event, and it was in downtown Manchester, and it was at a Trump or an anti-Trump rally, and they had signs up that said "Destroy white supremacy," and I was like, what is happening? Like what is this threat? What is this? So can you tell us maybe just a little bit more about the sort of academic background? Is it based in Marxism?
Yeah, it is absolutely based in Marxism. I mean, it's all, and the thing that is, I'm not really the expert in the academic background of it, so I'm not the best person to speak to it. I'll do it a little bit. Where I actually tend to focus on is my claim to fame is I've watched more woke training than probably anyone else on the planet. So I actually watch when they're going into organizations, and I watch what they're doing in schools, and I read curriculum and stuff like that. But no, it is absolutely based in Marxism. And what people really need to understand is the woke ideology is actually, this is going to sound really contradictory. It is not actually about the color of your skin. When they say the word whiteness or white supremacy, they're not actually talking about people who look like me. What they're talking about is who owns the power structure, because the woke do consider everything to be a fight between the oppressed and the oppressor. They also are advancing this concept of equity. If you see the term equity show up anywhere, and a lot of schools will actually have equity officers or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that they're working on. The concept of equity is also fundamentally Marxist. I mean, Marx said, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And that is what equity is going for. Most of us can agree with the idea of equality. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. advanced, right? The idea that his children would be judged on the content of their character rather than on the color of their skin. That is equality, and that I think is something that everyone should be on board with. What equity says is it is not about providing equal access to opportunity. It is about equalizing all outcomes. So Ibram X. Kendi, who's the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, he says that whenever there's racial disparity in terms of outcomes, in terms of who is getting the jobs or who's making the most money or things like that, racism is the only explanation for that. And Kendi has actually gone so far as to say that we should start doing present day discrimination to make up for past discrimination. So that's
basically what they're suggesting now, right? Like I have friends who also, we all grew up in South Africa together. In fact, they went to Nelson Mandela's inauguration with us. And, we were a handful of people who actually went and did that. And they're kids. They have 7-year-old twins, and they live in California. They're living the good life out in Cali. It's the one I walked away from, so kudos to them. But their kids went to school, and they came back from school, and they were depressed, twin boys. And it took them a couple of weeks to be like, pry out what exactly is going on. And they were like, well, we came back from school and someone told us we're racist because we're white.
Oh, yeah.
And they've never heard these ideas. They have multiracial friends from every corner of the world. It was just like, what is happening? So is it true that in New Hampshire, in the curriculum, we will see CRT?
Yes. Yeah, it is absolutely true. Now, we did pass an anti-CRT bill last year, which is a good start. And I think that, kudos to Keith Ammon for being the first state rep in the country. Keith Ammon introduced the first state anti-CRT bill in the country. That started here. And he did a good job with it. But the problem is the New Hampshire Senate screwed it up, and Chris Sununu also screwed it up. And so basically, there is an anti-CRT bill. What it is missing is it does not restrict teaching that America is a fundamentally racist country. And so that teaching, that one line alone that they took out of the bill, says that teachers can teach children that America was built on racism. That is the basis of the 1619 Project, which has been academically discredited, even though it won a Pulitzer Prize. That is also the basis of the idea of systemic racism, which if they can teach systemic racism, then they can teach equity, which is fundamentally Marxism. And so while it is true that they did outlaw some things, they did outlaw teaching that you cannot teach that one race is superior or inferior to another. You cannot teach that one gender is superior or inferior to another. You can't teach that people are fundamentally oppressors because of their race and gender, which is good. And that literally is being taught in some schools. I write about a case study in my book of a woman named Gabrielle Clark, who she filed the first ever CRT lawsuit against schools because they tried to make her son, who is biracial, but he looks white, they tried to make her son say that he was an oppressor in front of his class in order to graduate. So that is actually happening, but not in New Hampshire.
Wow.
Well, it's weird because like the conversation about this happening in schools is relatively new. Like I don't remember people bitching and complaining about this 2-3 years ago, but I think of people bitching and complaining this in the workplace and corporate culture for a decade.
Yeah.
Like at what point did it slide into schools, or were we just ignorant of the fact that it started there?
How did it slide into corporations? That's also a good question.
I'll tell you exactly how it slid into corporations. So there came and people can Google this. It's called
lube. Come on, someone help
God.
me.
No, so there was a paper written that outlined what a white supremacist culture is, and I think it was written, I want to say, in like the late 2000s, like 2007-ish. And it's that you can actually Google like white supremacist culture today, and this paper is going to come up that basically says that a white supremacist culture is anything in which people tell time or work hard or write things down, or perfectionism is considered to be white supremacist. That is the document that is very literally still used in organizations and schools today. But I will also say, in terms of schools, it's always been in schools. It's been, well, not always, but probably for the last at least 25 years. But after Trump got elected, they all started to lose their minds, and they really started to double down on it. So it has accelerated a great deal in schools to the point now where they're just being extremely overt about it. But this is also, I mean, it's hard to say when it really started, but what we have the benefit now of is we're getting access to curriculum. And I'll tell you what, the pandemic actually exposed a lot of this stuff because it was the first time that parents got to actually see what their kids were learning in class. So Zoom school, well, it sucked, did actually have a benefit in this regard.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if one of the reasons we discovered what was happening with the curricula was as a result of COVID and just sort of parents kind of checking in a little more. My husband said something that amused me at the time, as he said, you know how you can tell someone's not a great parent? They're the ones who can't wait for the schools to open. But the other parents were like, oh, this is kind of cool. You know, I got my kids around. So I do want to mention, because you had said something at the start of the show and we were saying, you know, we're seeing this spread nationally. I should also mention this is an issue that is actually spreading globally, and the language of it, because I was back in South Africa in 2019 and I hadn't been back in about, I think at that stage, 15 years. Louis had been back for funerals and some weddings and stuff. And I remember I was walking somewhere and I heard a TV, and there was a very angry lady on the TV, and she was talking about white privilege and in the context of South Africa. And then as we were there over the week, I saw that there were college riots and all these things, and they were chanting about white privilege. And that was not a word that was in a concept ever in South Africa. It wasn't something that was under apartheid or language known. In fact, I was so shocked because I'd only heard it in the context of like making fun of colleges in America, sort of, you know, like white privilege. And I was always kind of like, well, like if it exists, why wouldn't you want everyone to have it? That sounds awesome. You know?
Yeah. No, that's actually true. That's actually something that I get into an argument a lot with like white conservatives, because they're like, critical race theory is against white people. And I'm kind of like, No, it's actually not. Critical race theory actually says white people are actually the most powerful people in all of society. And
I mean, only lizard people top white people.
Exactly. And I mean, this is an ideology, although you could look at Kimberly Crenshaw as one of the people who advocated for it. But honestly, this is an ideology that has been advanced by liberal white academics. They're not taking themselves out of power anytime soon. So yeah.
So Karlyn,
Asian
here's
is more
one.
deep.
Is someone who quit teaching. Oh
Kevin.
shit, am I muted?
No, you're
No,
good, Kevin. I hear you now. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. As someone who worked in schools their whole life and quit this whole thing because I saw this coming from a mile away before COVID, before Trump, I was watching this slowly play out. How do you get me to go back to being a teacher again? What do you think is the solution to some of these issues? What makes someone like me who never pushed my ideology on kids to go back into a classroom just to teach?
I don't think you should go back into a classroom to teach. I think you should start an amazing homeschool co-op where you're helping other people to homeschool their kids. That is actually the honest answer. I do not think that the government schools are fixable at all. I think that, the problem is the teaching pool, because what's happening is the teachers are being taught this ideology. If they haven't learned it in high school, they're absolutely being taught when they go to educate, like the colleges of education, to learn how to be teachers. So it's not an exaggeration to say that almost every single public school teacher today not only buys into critical race theory and the woke ideology themselves, they have been trained to be teachers by people who bought into this ideology itself. So it takes at least 2 generations to even get our schools to a place where we have leveled out and are just teaching sanity again. So I don't want you going back to teaching the public schools.
No.
I want you teaching. I want you homeschooling. I want you teaching people. I think one of the things I would actually really like to do is work to make New Hampshire one of the most homeschool friendly states in the country. Our homeschool laws are a little bit weird right now. We're definitely more restrictive than some states, and I think we can do better about that. But I also want to do things to encourage entrepreneurship around homeschooling, because while I think that homeschooling is more attainable than a lot of parents think it is, a lot of parents perceive it to be completely out of reach. And if we can make it easier for parents, then I think the more people that can get pulled out of the government schools, the better.
Now, I hate when you say like that you don't want people to go back to teaching, and I know that you're right. Like, unfortunately, I know in my heart and seeing things the way things have become that you're right. But like for the longest time, we used to look at things like the schools are the future, the children are the future. Like the reason the Do It for the Children has so much power is because everyone knows that they're the future. In the schools are where they're being brainwashed, where they're being taught. I used to tell people you should go be a teacher. Like if you don't know what you want to do, but you're a hardcore libertarian, like go be a teacher. Like stop the brainwashing from the start. Like go where you have a chance to impact people at their like most susceptible, and teach them about freedom and liberty in the classroom. But like I've had some friends that have gone and done that. I had a friend here in Manchester, New Hampshire, who went and did that. She was a libertarian, and Manchester School District was so desperate for teachers, they were waiving all of the requirements about needing like education and teaching and a master's degree and everything, and hiring anybody as long as you could pass some basic standards to teach. And she went to go teach at Manchester High School, and after about 2 years, she couldn't take it anymore, and she's no longer a teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the strategy behind it, but again, like from being an organizational psychologist, I'm very good at assessing kind of like social systems and figuring out what I need to do to fix those systems from a people level. The public schools are not fixable. They're just not fixable. And I think that if we keep lying to ourselves about it and keep trying these things, like if we can just create more libertarian teachers, everything will be fixed. Well, no, because to be really honest, like the state shouldn't be indoctrinating anyone with any ideology. I mean, the only answer to this is just getting rid of the government schools entirely. I do think an interim thing that we can do is we should all be supporting school choice as much as we can. I mean, school choice is going to be imperative to this. But I also would argue that we should also be trying to put what I would like to do if I was elected governor of New Hampshire. My very first act on day 1 would be to sign an executive order putting cameras in every public school classroom in the state within 6 months. And if they don't put the cameras in the classrooms within 6 months, they lose their taxpayer funding entirely. And I want the live streams from those cameras to be available to every single student in those classes, or not, excuse me, the parents of every single student in those classes, not public, but to parents. And the idea is that, we saw that parents, when they saw what their kids were being taught over the pandemic, when they actually saw the coursework, They activated, they mobilized. And so if we can give parents direct access to that information on an ongoing basis, I not only think that it would help make parents more informed about what's actually going on in schools, I also think it would actually tone down the amount of indoctrination teachers are doing because they know they're being watched. While ultimately the goal should be to defund the schools entirely, at least throwing sand in their gears and getting them to slow down would also be really helpful.
So this idea of yours, it's already controversial as heck, and I've seen you take
Yeah.
huge amounts of flack from the left on it on Twitter, and even some libertarians and people on the right saying, "Oh, you just is increasing the surveillance state." I don't think this is even controversial. I don't even think it's a bad idea from an academic standpoint, because I just look back. I think back to when I was in college, like forever ago at this point, like 10, 15 years ago, when I was still going through the academic process. I had teachers that had cameras set up to live stream all of their classes. And you don't film the students, you don't film the classroom. All you need to do is focus on the teacher, the whiteboard in the front of the class. And my teachers used that as a teaching and learning tool too, because they made those recordings available after the class for people to go back on things they missed and study. Like it could be used as a resource for the education system as well.
Absolutely. And I've actually talked to teachers that say that. They say, why wouldn't I want my kids to have access to like a live stream of their class if they're out sick or something like that? I mean, we are literally broadcasting public school classrooms over the internet for 2 years. Like this is not an unheard of concept. In fact, they already have the equipment to do it because they bought it under COVID.
That's a really interesting concept. I guess I'd like to unpack it a little more, just because I'm squarely in the anti-surveillance state thing. So one of the things I heard that I really liked was that you said it wouldn't necessarily be publicly streamed. It would just be like a nanny cam that parents can watch, right?
Yes.
So I think that addresses some issues there. It would be interesting and something, if we do start to do legislation on this, we should make sure how it relates to things like 91As. We have seen with police cams that they are using it in a way to actually surveil, but also circumvent open government requests. So, there are always a bunch of moving parts, be like ban maybe facial recognition software on the kids, all of that. I think that's so interesting, because in some ways it's us trying to use tech to solve a problem, and I'm all about that. But then I'm like, but the tech exists with the best teachers in the world that any child can go see now. And I feel like this is also such a giant elephant in the room when we talk about the challenges with education is no one wants to talk about this, but I'm sorry. I think like a in real life teacher who's just teaching you subjects, if not solely indoctrination, is done. That era is over. We have passed that. You can, anything you want to learn, the Khan Academy and MIT is going to give you a better class than, I'm sorry, even the best teacher in New Hampshire is going to be able to muster. And maybe not. And then maybe if that teacher is that exceptional teacher, maybe she has the time to go make the videos to be like the best teacher on the internet for this thing, right? So I think we're stuck in this sort of paradigm where we're like, but can't you guys see this isn't working? Can we try something else, please? So to your point, micro schools, the pods, school choice. Maybe one of the things, and I'd be curious about what your thoughts are, is I think it was Milton Friedman who suggested that we privatize the public schools. So you actually corporatize it in the sense that you let the teachers and the principal and the people who are vested in that, who are like, what's going to happen to my job? Where do I fit into this brave new world you're building, braver new world? And so maybe, we can come up with something that sounds alluring so that they stop clinging to this faded factory model. It's done.
Yeah.
I don't know what the question is, but
well, no, there's a lot. I agree with you there, Carla. I do think that there are so many resources out there right now that are far superior to the government schools, which is why I'm such a big proponent of homeschooling. And I really hope that people start. I think that if even we can make homeschooling 10% more attainable for like your average parent, I even think that would make a huge difference. I think a lot of parents are just in their head on this. They don't realize how many resources are available. And I think even just showing them. You can use Khan Academy, you can use YouTube, you have all these things where you pay $25 a month can make a big difference. I also have sympathy over the whole idea of a surveillance state. I don't necessarily, and the reason that I would still push for this idea anyway is because it is fundamentally designed to surveil the state. It is using the state to mandate that the states that we be able to surveil what the state is doing, because the greatest trick that the teachers unions ever played was convincing people that teachers are not government employees. They're absolutely government employees. Our whole entire education system is built up around the Prussian model, which is basically molding students to be good little wards of the state. And so this is using it, little factory workers. And the thing of it is ultimately, I think the cameras in classrooms, even though I do hear the surveillance issues, I think cameras in classrooms would accelerate the defunding of the government schools. I think it would be the thing that would get the most parents out of it the absolute fastest. And so I'm on board.
So in that vein, I mean, there's a couple comments in chat I want to bring up because they're really relevant right now. First off, Mark Warden, one of our favorite Liberty State representatives in Concord, says, "Hi, y'all. We're trying to make improvements in the legislature, but there's a ton of inertia and opposition from the incumbent rent seekers," which is true. And it's really unfortunate. Like there is money pouring in from out of state, all over the country to fight this in New Hampshire because New Hampshire is putting up the fight. But then a couple of questions. One of our favorites, Breaking the Flaw, asks, how much does it cost to homeschool compared to the public prison system? And Tigger wants to know, what is the best way to use CRT and Marxism to push for school choice? Like, how can we use that to our advantage?
I don't know the question on how much it costs the average homeschool. I will say that it's going to be significantly less. It's going to be significantly cheaper than paying for school tuition. I mean, one of the things that I would also want to do if I was elected governor of New Hampshire is I would want to work with the legislature to try to find a way to make the property tax optional, because 66% of my property tax goes towards funding the public schools. I don't even use the public schools. Like, why am I paying for them if I don't even use them? And I think if you give parents the choice, they're going to find that they could take that property tax money and use it very simply to homeschool their children. So it is one of the most direct ways that we can actually get to school choice. But in regards to the question of what was the question about, like, how do we use CRT against them, essentially?
Right, like push for school choice.
Weaponized.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easiest way to do that, honestly, is people have got to pay attention to what their kids are being taught in the schools. You've got to photocopy all the homework. You got to FOIA all the homework, or like do right to know requests in New Hampshire, because this is all publicly available information. And to be honest, one of the best things that you can do FOIA requests around, or public information requests, is not even like the homework or the curriculum. The New Hampshire legislature just passed a parental rights bill that I think is going to be really helpful in terms of giving parents access to the curriculum and things like that. However, FOIA your teachers' emails. If your school has a director of equity, FOIA their emails. I actually have a webinar on my website, activelyunwoke.com. If people go to the live events section, it's from a woman named Nicole Solis, and she is actually a mom in Rhode Island that FOIA'd her school, her 5-year-old daughter's school so much that the teachers union sued her. She sent in like thousands of FOIA requests, and that's what
I think it was like 700 and something. It was. Yeah. I heard of that lady.
Oh yeah, she's a badass. She's amazing. But I have a webinar with her where she taught parents how to send in FOIA requests and what keywords to target and things like that, because it's all got to be all about exposure. They've been doing all this stuff for years, not knowing that we aren't looking at what they're doing. Now we're looking. And so if we can just get access to that information and just blow it up as much as possible, that's the quickest way to end the government schools.
I was joking that all these people that are complaining and bitching and freaking out every time the Liberty reps pass a bill that says you can't do this in public schools, and they're throwing a fit about it. I'm like, well, why don't you send your kids to a private school where they do it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the private schools are actually worse. I mean, to be honest, because the private schools make you sign an agreement that you'll abide by whatever their policies are. And if you try to fight them, or even say why are you teaching this why are you teaching my kindergartner about sex? The private schools can just kick you out. So it is actually worse in the private schools.
Right, but maybe that's where these Marxists belong.
I mean, yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, it's like I think that people should be able to listen. If the entire state of Vermont wants to turn into a commune, which it's really not far off from, by the way. I actually just got an excellent hit piece. I got an excellent hit piece written about me in the state of Vermont because I'm basically going to war with Burlington, Vermont at the moment. Anyway, if they want to educate their kids in communism and that's a community choice, people should be able to make that choice. I think it's stupid, but I certainly don't want it in New Hampshire. And another thing I'll do as governor is build a wall on the border for anyone in Vermont. They have to show proof of voter record if they're coming into New Hampshire. I'm only half joking. I'm half serious about that.
Oh no, there's a wall
the wall will go very nicely with the moat that I'm putting in the southern border with Massachusetts. So we got the wall up with Vermont. We got a moat with Mass. I'm willing to trade with Maine. I like that coastline. I think, we'll give them a chance. But back to the cameras in the classroom, I did want to make one little note. I watched 2,000 Mules over yesterday. So that's the new Dinesh D'Souza documentary that's come out that's kind of looking at the 2020 elections. And what I found really fascinating, one, I thought there was enough evidence for me to be like, meh, I wasn't paying attention back when it happened. And now I'm like, well, it does seem like there's some weird stuff going on. But basically the gist, and I won't spoil everything, but the gist is that they FOIA and right to know a lot of publicly available surveillance data. So the inadvertent thing that I really took away from the documentary was that it's both a documentary about election fraud in 2020, but it is also a documentary about the surveillance state that just exists around us. So there were all these drop boxes, and the way he builds his case, which is basically to say that there are these people who keep going to these different drop boxes. They have between 3 and 10 sheets every time. And what they did is they FOIA'd their geolocations on their phones, publicly available information. And then they overlaid it with the drop boxes. And then they overlaid it with commonly available state surveillance cameras that were pointed at those drop boxes. And between those three things, they were like, ta-da, we can show at least this many, rigged votes are possible, right? And so it was like, we may be in the panopticon. I don't know if we can stop it. And then if we can't, maybe if everything's just being recorded, the outcomes over time will actually be better.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think that we have to be strategic and we have to be smart about how we're fighting back right now. And I think any opportunity we have to use, frankly, the state against themselves, we should absolutely be taking advantage of it. Does it leave a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth? I mean, sure. I'm not thrilled at the idea of cameras being in public school classrooms. However, the rest of their lives are already being surveilled. They're already on school buses. They're already in daycares. They're already at sports events. So it's kind of like, if we can take this one next step and then use the information against them, I think that, we have to be able to use whatever ammo we can in order to defeat this, because we're already really behind. I mean, the woke left have been doing this for at least 50 years, if not longer. So we have a lot of ground to make up.
Yeah, and in the schools and the universities. I mean, I knew for myself when I did my MFA at City College in New York in 2008 is when I graduated. I remember doing the entire course, and I mean, I was learning to tell stories well, right? So it's not like I was doing brain science, but I just remember I was reading Foucault and all these things in these classes. And I was just like, man, I must have done too much acid and Goa because none of this crap makes any sense. I was just like, it doesn't make sense. And I just thought, I'd become stupid. And then, 10 years later, I was like, oh, that's what was happening. But, I'm a strong personality. And I mean, I didn't cave. I came back with my positions. But, it was 1 against the class of 20 every time. And so we're also putting that energy into the world as we create this language and just this energy, for lack of a better word, of how we're going to deal with each other. The government is in the business of creating victims at this stage. Like they're
At every
either
level.
perpetuating trauma on people, or they're just telling them, for those they can't traumatize, they're just literally brainwashing them to tell them they're inferior, or they're in this thing where they can't take care of themselves, or they're a victim, or you're oppressed. And it's such a sick way to look at the world. I don't understand why, you know, the average sort of mom and dad in New Hampshire would want to even tolerate this kind of stuff being the way we're going to teach our children the world works.
I mean, because, well, listen, first off, I do want to say, I think we're in probably the best position in New Hampshire of any state in the country. And I thank God all the time that I accidentally ended up moving here, because I moved here when I was still a Democrat. I had no idea about this Free State Project stuff. And 11 years later, it's actually going to be 11 years on May 14th that I moved here. So I'm thankful that I did, because we are in a really good position because of the culture here. But the fact is, too, it gets a little bit dangerous with the liberty culture in New Hampshire, because a lot of us spend so much time around it that I think we sometimes forget that there are also an awful lot of people in New Hampshire who are not in this culture. Like I said,
normies.
I lived here for 10 years before I had any interactions with the libertarians at all. I had no idea what was going on. And of course, now, I mean, there's so many campaigns against the Free State Project in New Hampshire that a lot of people are you know, they think that we are horrible terrorists when in fact we just want their kids not to be brainwashed and stuff like that.
My favorite one was the protest up in Concord, and the old lady's just holding the sign.
They had 3 signs, and there was a dog.
Google Free Staters.
Yeah.
And I just cropped it, zoomed in on her. I'm like, listen to the old lady. Google Free Staters.
Yeah.
And that dog didn't want to be there.
To that point, like we separate ourselves from culture at large. And I think this is a big problem that a lot of politically active people have, and people who, like, when you decide the values and culture and like politics you want to live your life by, you kind of fall into the niche. And I've actually stumbled upon a leftist. She's a professor of feminism at NYU, but she wrote a book about why anarchists fail so much, and it's because they only talk to other anarchists.
It's
and
true.
I'm like, I'm reading her book, and I'm like, I feel seen right now. But at the same time, like I myself have been fortunate to, for the past 10 years, every job I've had, every company I've worked for has been the antithesis of this culture-wise. But I've seen other people coming in and being shocked when they get into our workplace, like, what do you guys can make jokes like that here? I'm like, yeah, why? And it's like, oh, we'd be fired in a heartbeat. I'm like, oh, we don't have an HR department here. It's like, I like working for small consulting groups because it's all like that. But Q9D on YouTube points out, like, this ideology invaded his company 5 years ago and in full force, and it's now collapsing, and they're being sued by employees and shareholders in the state of California. The goal is to destroy.
Yes.
And that's not simply happening to companies in California or New York or Massachusetts. I have a friend who works at a pretty big company here in New Hampshire who told us a story the other day about how they have a running gag on like their group chat where anytime there's a new employee hired, they ask them what their favorite donut is. And then there's a joke corresponding to what the answer is. And jelly donuts means you're a sociopath if your favorite joke is a jelly donut. God. And then it's been something that's been going on for months, for years, as just part of the workplace culture that everybody's in on it. And then like a couple weeks ago, they got an email from HR saying they were no longer allowed to make jelly donut jokes because they were offensive to the Jewish people.
Oh my God. I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. There are a lot of companies in New Hampshire that are totally sucked in by this stuff. BAA systems.
Well, I mean, they're an offense contractor. What can you expect?
Halliburton has the best DEI member that I've ever seen. So
I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, it's like, you know, I think that a lot of this stuff in the workplace, it will destroy organizations because it actively works against the core concept of organizational productivity, which is psychological safety, because it encourages team members to call each other out, and call each other a racist. And so if they struggle, integrating struggle sessions into the workplace. And so it will destroy team psychological safety, which will eventually destroy organizations entirely. And New Hampshire's not immune to it, because again, there are a lot of people in New Hampshire that are not, you know, part of our circles, right? And then would sooner ignore us if they could. So, well, I think we're in a better position than most. There's still work to do.
And so with the end goal there, so in some ways, it doesn't make sense to me that people want to destroy larger corporations, which would be the first place these kinds of policies come in, right? Because I see what's happening more as a corporatism, sort of meshing of big government and big big organizations. So it's almost more fascistic. Right. So, I mean, it always made sense to me that they, said that small businesses couldn't open up, the first stimmy was $600. That's exactly $15 for a 40-hour work week. I don't think that was an accident, so why do they just not see? Are they blind? I guess they're blind. I'm sorry, I answered my own question.
They don't see because they don't want to see. Like, it is hard to be in this world. It is hard to see reality the way it is.
Even libertarians, even there are some libertarian groups that are struggling to not be overcome by it. Like, I get that they get mad when I call them regime libertarians, but Cato Institute today put out a tweet celebrating that the new press secretary is a black gay woman.
I mean, here's the question I have about the new press secretary. Like, can she define a woman? How often is
she going to lie to us?
And my question is, like, is she really a lesbian if she can't define a woman?
Right. She's no biologist.
Well, my question is, like, since when does it matter?
How can they say she's a lesbian? Is the reality, question.
The question
and is she transphobic if she refuses to sleep with someone with a dick?
The question we should be asking of the press secretary is, should it matter the gender, the race, or the sexuality of a person whose job it is to lie, deceive, and mislead the American people?
No, it shouldn't matter at all. It's just like the whole thing is ridiculous, but no, everyone gets sucked into it. And part of the reason is that people don't understand what's going on. They think we are trained that this is the thing that we need to do in order to be a good and virtuous person from the time that we are little kids. And a lot of people are really afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of upsetting people. They don't want to engage in it. But like, what they need to understand is that the only way to beat back this ideology is to go at it head like as strongly as you can, as aggressively as you can, to hit it right between the eyes and say, no, you will not do this anymore. Most people are just unwilling to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. Honestly, I think the wake up for me, I actually went to that CRT march that was up at the State House. I think you were there. There were, a bunch of us were there. And I went as an immigrant. I was actually one of the immigrants. We were on the state stairs. We all had signs in our home languages, sort of, saying we're all created equal, sort of leaning into the notion as it should be. Like, it's not equity, but opportunity, equality. Anyway, so I was there because I realized I'm going to have to speak out, and it's difficult, right? Like, there's just nowhere to go. Everyone saw the Elon Musk things come out in the past week. The New York Times had a headline, saying that because he grew up in apartheid South Africa, he must be a racist, and he's only bought Twitter so that he could say the N-word again. And I was like, and if you mean by the N-word, the Nuremberg Code, for which we were all censored, then you're probably right. Anyway, so I'm speaking up as someone who finds all of this horribly uncomfortable because it sucks, right? Like, it sucks to actually have to say, which I had to say to a friend of mine, you can't say it's a microaggression if I'm nice to you, and it's a microaggression if I'm mean to you. Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Someone help me out.
And they'll say words are violence, and then they'll say silence is violence, and they use language as their most powerful weapon just to keep people confused, because if people are confused, they're much less likely to speak up. They will also use the idea that you're a racist against you all the time. I mean, the very first chapter, the introduction to my book, is literally called "You Are Not a Racist," because if you speak up against this ideology, you will be called a racist. I just got called a racist in 7 Days in Vermont today, and a transphobe apparently as well. And it's like, you just have to accept that you are not these things. You have to know who you are, and that the people calling you these things are only doing it because they want to get power over you. At the end of the day, the goal of all of the woke ideology is just to gain more political power so that they can destabilize the system, so they can attack capitalism, so they can usher in a Marxist utopia. That is it. And whether they're talking about race or gender or sexual like a sexual identity or gender identity or any of these things, it is all about gaining more power so they can destabilize the system, so they can attack capitalism, so they can usher in their Marxist utopia. That's it.
Now,
And it's also
That
all
almost-
things
I was
that
gonna
make
say,
us
Carla pointed out.
genuinely sorry, things
go.
that make you genuinely uncomfortable. So if we're back at that person, right? You know, Project Veritas will say, be brave. There's this message that we really have to get out there where it's like, this isn't fun. None of us are relishing in this. I mean, maybe Karlyn and I enjoy a good spat now and then. but it's not, you know, it's not actually fun to be called names, especially harmful, horrible names that have nothing to do with you as a person. And it's like, it's nasty. I mean, it's like 3-year-olds, right? But they do that on purpose because they want to silence the people who are willing to go, now come on, kids, that makes no frigging sense. Let's break it down and then let's go. You can't say it's racist when white people do it to another color person, but it's not racist when a black person does it to another color person. These things don't make sense. Let's break it down. And that's why they do it. They pick the subjects we don't want to talk about.
That's
Well,
exactly
it's not just
right.
that we don't want to talk about it, it's that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. And I think one of the problems has been is like, Carla, you pointed out when you went to these protests, it was a group of people that had never been activated before who were activated, a group of people who had come out of the woodworks that were angry and finally wanted to get involved and get something done. But a lot of these people, they're not libertarian. They're people on the right, center right, conservatives, Republicans, Trump people, MAGA people, people who don't agree with us on most other issues, including things like surveillance state and police brutality and legalizing drugs and ending the drug war. There's a big question. It's like, how do we maybe use a wedge issue like this to drag people to our side on other issues? Because this is a big wedge issue that activated people who aren't on our side to be on our side for this particular cause. How do we keep them on our side and bring them around to actually realizing the state is the issue, not just what the state's teaching? Because like these people, most of them are perfectly fine with public schools. They want their public schools. They want their kids taught in public schools. They just want the public school indoctrinating their kids in a different way. So how do we make them realize that the indoctrination in the first place is the problem?
I mean, I think that, again, I think we do have an advantage in New Hampshire. I kind of joke, but it is actually not a joke, that the Free State Project and the LPNH radicalized me. Like, I kind of hung out with the conservatives during 2020. I toured with the Walkaway campaign all over the country, trying to do reopen rallies and, quite frankly, like covertly stumping for Trump because he was a better option to me than Joe Biden. Not that I think Trump is perfect, but he was a better option in 2020. I think we can all admit that. And so, no, but like with conservatives, they really don't understand that the state is the problem in a lot of this, and they're very much like rule followers. They want to back the blue, and they're very like they're reticent to pull their kids out of public schools if they have to. It is very literally being around libertarian culture in New Hampshire that I think is one of the things that could start to change this, because you have to point out to people that, like, listen, if the state is on your side, great, but the minute that they aren't on your side, they're going to be creating a world of hurt for you in a way that you can't possibly imagine. And I think we've got it pretty good here because of the culture we have built here, but I think it's a matter of getting people more involved with the culture and really using that as an opportunity to kind of teach these different values. Like, why, like I'm really thinking about like the next book I'm going to write at this point, and I think it might be the case for defunding the schools, because I think, again, that needs to be something that's really explicitly laid out to people. Like, public education was very literally built to support the state. Every dollar we put into it is only supporting and uplifting the state, and they will use it against you. And why are we paying for them to use it against you?
So is it even worth running for school board?
I think it is. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, to be honest, school boards do not really have that much say over what goes on in the curriculum. It's only in Vermont and Connecticut that school boards actually have say over curriculum. So school boards are mostly about budget. But is it worth running for? Sure. I mean, at least it's a check on things, and it gets you in some sort of position of power to be able to see the budget, to be able to make requests of the school, to be able to oversee the superintendent, to be able to get that superintendent out if they're doing things like covering for pedophiles in the schools like they were in the Timberland School District district that I got banned from school board meetings for, but that's okay because the superintendent resigned anyway. So there is value, but people need to be realistic about what can be accomplished.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention what happened with the Croydon school vote over the weekend. So I did see some tweets go by that I had to just be like, don't lean into this, just let it go by. The vote did not go to the budget cutters side, but basically what happened was the people who did not want their property taxes to go up, so the people who suggested or the group that voted actually at the original meeting to cut the school budget in half, they had a campaign that said just stay home, because the number for the quorum was pretty high. Just for the sake of argument, I'm going to say it's 300. It was a little less than that. So it was a game of turnout. So unfortunately, enough people turned out. Let's say it was like 300. But no one turned out from the other side. So the final numbers, whatever it is, like 300 to 2. So now everyone in the world is like, look, they got their asses handed to them. Only 2 people supported this. And I was like, no, 40% of people plus supported it. They just stayed home. So the tipping point, I think it's a good bellwether. The tipping point isn't quite there yet, but that's actually not a huge margin to have to close. I feel like 10% of our friends and neighbors and people in New Hampshire are curious enough that if we frame it in a way that they can grasp, they're going to be like, yeah, that's right. I don't actually want my children. Forget about whatever racism, all of that. Just, do I want my child to grow up in a paradigm where we are teaching people there are oppressors and the oppressed? Because you are teaching your child not to excel. And any righteous parent wants their children to excel. They want to have aspirational lives. They want them to do well. And that's what we want for our children in New Hampshire. And that means changing what we're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karlyn, how can people learn more about your book? What's your book about? Give me your plug.
Yeah, my super awesome book. Isn't it pretty? I love this cover so much. So it's called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. You can find more about it on activelyunwoke.com and order it. It comes out tomorrow. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, independent booksellers. So it's all over the place. And basically what it's about, what I did in the first half of the book is I tried to decode the woke ideology in plain English. So to explain it to people in the easiest possible terms I can assess, like, what is critical race theory? What are microaggressions? What does it mean to be woke? What does it mean to be, is this a battle of left versus right? I explain it very simply. And then I give a lot of case studies. I went into case studies about people who fought back in corporate America, people who fought back in the public schools, people who fought back through culture, and people who fought back by passing laws, just like we did in New Hampshire. I actually talked about the anti-CRT bill that we passed here. And then I give people information on how to take care of yourself when you're fighting back against the woke and what to do if you're canceled, because you almost inevitably will be canceled at some point. But what people need to hear about being canceled is that it's probably not going to be as bad as you think it is. The fear of the thing is worse than the thing itself. I've been canceled probably, 7-8 times in the last couple of years, and I've managed to survive all of them and thrive and do good things. So that's what the book is. I'm really excited about it, and I hope everyone enjoys it. And if you do enjoy it, leave a review on Amazon. If you do not enjoy it, don't leave a review on Amazon. Just keep it to yourself.
I've been canceled 4 times in the past 6 months. In fact, there was a negative review campaign going on my book on Amazon, but that's a time for a different day.
Don't give people any ideas, Justin.
Yeah, if cancellation becomes a numbers thing, then it really doesn't have the power. It's not. It's right. Like every cancellation is creating another entrepreneur. So bring it on, people.
Exactly.
So again, great show, fun show. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you everybody for joining, watching, and the great questions that we had in chat. And one final comment from earlier in the show when Karlyn was talking about her knitting group and the awful people in her knitting group. We had Patty on Facebook wanted to let you know you should quit knitting group and join hers, the Free State Stitch and Bitch group in Manchester. They have a knitting tent at Porkfest too.
Excellent. And apparently I will be teaching an intro to knitting class at Porkfest. So I'll be doing that. I did it last year. I'll do it again this year. And I would love to join Patty's group.
So Stitch and Bish meets in Manchester, and if you are looking for other events in New Hampshire where you can meet with great libertarians that you want to get to know, meet your neighbors, check out the calendar on fsp.org/calendar. There's an event that happens almost every night, almost in every region of the state. It's the most packed Liberty calendar in the world. Constant stuff all the time. And if you haven't gotten your tickets to PorkFest yet, too late. It's sold out. Tickets are off sale. Not too late. There's some secondary market action going now. As good capitalists as libertarians are, everyone has a price. You might just need to meet it. So check in the Facebook groups, the Telegram, the Discord, the Signal. You can reach out and find a ticket if you really want one. But tickets are no longer on sale. Dennis Pratt did an awesome job organizing, getting stuff ready to go. Sold out, which means another biggest year ever for PorkFest coming up in a few weeks. And if you haven't visited New Hampshire, it's the perfect time to visit. And if you can't make it for PorkFest, check out fsp.org/visit to plan your visit today, where you can come meet your neighbors, tour the area, find your forever home, so to speak. Or if you're one of the people that moves twice, you can move to Manchester and then move somewhere else. But the first step is making that visit, coming home, and meeting your friends. Anybody have anything else?
Join the Discord server. I have tickets for PorkFest. I have campsites. I have RV sites.
Yeah. All right. Hey, well, it's been fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for coming on. Thank you, Karlyn, for joining. And until next time, everybody, be free.
Live free and thrive. Cheers, guys.
Live free or die. Don't let the freedom pass you by. Stand up proud and strong and lead this country on. Live free or die. From the village green to the mountainside, Yankee voices sing the song of liberty.
In 1623, she touched the hand of history and led the colonies on. Independence was won, and the spirit lives today to guide America on her way. New Hampshire standing free, the home of liberty.
Live free or die, don't let the freedom pass you by. Stand up proud and strong